Since 2018, I've been ministering to a transsexual Christian. Now, he had his sexual reassignment surgery in 2003. He began on hormone replacement therapy in 1997. In 1995, he left his family and decided to just go full into the transgendered lifestyle. And in 1978, he and his wife to be, attended the church where I was ministering, and I performed their wedding ceremony, and they went on to have 4 children together. We'll talk more about that in an upcoming broadcast. But today what I wanted to do was focus on the notion of the whole question of gender. And particularly, I wanted to raise the question of what should shape a person's thinking and our cultural beliefs about what it means to be a man or a woman. Should it be a gender identity, or should it be biological reality? In order to do that, I think we have to ask and answer the question, what is gender? And we're going to be exploring that a little bit in detail today and in some of the upcoming broadcasts that I'm going to be doing. But we find, I Googled the definition, and I found that gender refers to the socially constructed roles, behaviors, expressions, and identities associated with being a man, woman, or other gender distinct from biological sex. It encompasses gender identity. Now, gender identity is a person's internal sense of their own gender. It encompasses their gender expression, and gender expression is how they outwardly present their gender, and it also encompasses societal norms and expectations. Societal norms and expectations surrounding what's masculinity and femininity. Now, the definition went on to say that gender is a spectrum, not a strict binary, and can vary across cultures and over time. But one of the things I want to point out is that these are truth claims. Just because a definition is posted on the internet somewhere doesn't mean that that definition is true. I'm old enough to remember the bumper sticker, question authority, and it's I've tried to live my life with a healthy skepticism about what I'm told and make sure that I have good evidence to believe what I believe. Now, these claims about gender being socially constructed, that's a truth claim. And then also the claim that gender is a spectrum that varies across cultures and over time, again, that's a truth claim. And these truth claims must not be accepted uncritically. We need to be critical thinkers, think for ourselves, and not just believe what we're told. Now, today what I want to do is kind of walk down the path of what should shape a person's thinking and our cultural beliefs about what it means to be a man or a woman. Is it gender identity or biological reality? Now, one of those two is going to be paramount. One of those two is going to be the determinant of how we think about this particular issue. And so what happens is that once we decide on a particular answer to that question, we essentially pay the fare for the bus and get our ticket and then begin all the stops along the way. And that and so what we think about this issue, where we start, determines our trajectory and our destination. It determines where we're going to stop with respect to medicine and mental health. On our bus ride that we've boarded, and when we have a particular viewpoint about, is it gender identity or biological reality, that medical and mental health practices seek to answer the question of what's in the best interest of transgender persons, both physically and mentally. That's one domain that's affected by this our initial answer to the question of whether or not that gender identity or biological reality should be the determining factor in our understanding of this topic. Another stop along the way is going to be law and politics. And again, if we start off on our journey saying that gender identity is the prime determinant, well then it's going to shape our view about law and politics. And if we say that biological reality should be the prime determinant, is that's going to shape our view about law and politics. And that encompasses questions like, what are the rights of transgendered persons? How do these rights play out in society at large? How do these laws impact education, women's spaces, parental rights, and freedom of conscience and speech? And we see this over and over in our culture today. But what we're really seeing is we're seeing the fruit of a particular answer to the question of whether or not gender identity is the prime determinant or biological reality. And that gets played out in the drama of our law and politics. Another arena where this shows up is within our social interactions. And we have to ask ourselves the question of that, should I acknowledge as fact the transgender person's claim to be something other than his or her birth sex? And what about pronouns? Now, as I've said before, that when I am talking to Chris, that I practice what I would call a pronoun hospitality. I didn't come up with that designation. Some other thinkers have coined that term. And I practice pronoun hospitality when I'm talking to Chris, but when I'm talking about Chris, is that I refer to him with respect to his birth sex. And so, there's a lot of questions that need to be answered with respect to this whole issue. And again, another big area where we end up on this, once we board that bus and take the ride, so to speak, is the question of philosophy and religion. What philosophical and or religious teachings inform our understanding on this topic? Are these philosophical religious teachings normative or simply cultural and preferential? And those are big questions. But I think the big questions are the ones that are worth asking. And particularly when it comes down to what philosophies inform the idea that that gender identity is the main factor in how we treat people and also how we shape our culture, or what philosophies are the main idea behind biological reality. And so I would like to just make a comparison briefly. There's a lot more that we could say about this, and there's probably a lot more that I will say as time goes on. But when we're thinking about biological reality and comparing that to gender identity, that the prime factor that sets the course on thinking about these matters is the question is that should a person's birth sex be determinant in how we think about that person and the policies that we adopt within our culture, the policies and practices that we adopt within our culture. And that ends up with a binary view, that male and female. Now, I'm going to explore a little bit further the whole question, how that question holds up historically, but not today. But I do want to take a look at that in a future broadcast. But with respect to gender identity, is that the basic, the foundational understanding with respect to gender identity being the issue that determines a person's how a person regards themselves and how society should regard that person, is that it's driven by an internal sense that essentially is disclosed by that individual, and gender identity is a whole spectrum. Now, I've heard and I've done quite a bit of research on this issue, but I've heard individuals talking about that this spectrum potentially is infinite. And that raises a lot of questions in my mind, and I hope to share some of those with you along the way. Another comparison that we can look at with respect to these two different approaches, and as far as I can tell, there are two and only two approaches to whether or not biological reality should be the factor that shapes our thinking, shapes our personal thinking about these matters, regardless of who we are, and also should shape our cultural policies and practices. When we are doing our analysis of these two basic approaches to answering this question, is that we discover that biological reality is rooted in objective fact, is that we can determine what a person's chromosomes are, we can determine what their hormones are, and we can determine what their phenotype is. And so these are all disclosed at birth. Nobody, that the vast majority of people, their sex is not assigned at birth. For the vast majority of people, their sex is discovered at birth, or perhaps through an ultrasound before birth. But with respect to gender identity, we don't have a clue actually about what a person's gender identity is unless they reveal that their internal sense to us, they disclose their internal sense to us, and that internal sense is rooted in a subjective feeling. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But on the one hand, we're talking about objective facts, and on the other hand, we're talking about subjective feelings. And I think that this is an important comparison between these two approaches. Additionally, when it comes to these two approaches, is that that with respect to how do we respond to an individual who is struggling with gender dysphoria, well, one route under the biological reality approach is psychological therapy. And then when it comes to the gender identity route, that the route that's championed by so many today is social and medical transitioning. But what about those individuals who say, I feel like a woman? What about those men who are born male who say that I feel like a woman? How are we to respond to that? And I've tried to be extremely sensitive in my interactions with Chris with respect to this, because I know that those feelings are very deep-seated and very pronounced. And so we've had conversations about that along the way. It's not the only thing that we talk about, We talk about a lot of things, including swapping dad jokes quite a bit. But I think it's fair to ask in a respectful way that when you say, I feel like a woman, what do you mean by that? It's an important question to ask, because that idea, that word woman in that statement, there has to be some sort of objective referent to which the word applies. Now, when you say that I feel like a woman, obviously you have some concept of what a woman is. So when it comes to your concept of what a woman is, then what is a woman? You don't have to be argumentative about this. I think that it's better to be inquisitive and have a measure of appropriate curiosity and ask some questions to say, well, what do you mean when you say that you feel like a woman? That question is complex at many levels. And another level is the word there, or at least the phrase there where it says, I feel like. I feel like. Well, that raises the question, when you say I feel like a woman, are you saying that emotions are gendered? That there are certain emotions that women have that men don't have? What are these male emotions and what are these female emotions? I've been married for a long time now, and I know that while my wife and I express our emotions differently, is that I've never discovered my wife having an emotion that I don't also feel. And so I feel like a woman. What does this mean? This is one of the areas where I just keep coming back to in thinking through this issue. And it's really the matter of language. And we have bought into a lot of language that we need to be curious about and inquisitive about. What exactly is the meaning of that? Like I said, the whole concept of sex being assigned at birth, it just doesn't happen. Now, yeah, in some rare cases it does, and we've talked about those in past broadcasts. So also this question about, well, I feel like a woman. If you don't have a clear idea of what a woman is, and a lot of people don't, it seems, in our culture today, and that if you're going to at least concede the point that emotions are not gendered, then what do you mean when you say I feel like a woman. Now, are you saying that males have female physical sensations? What do you mean by this? Because can a man, someone who's born male, actually know what it's like to menstruate? Or can a man know what it's like to feel pregnant? So I don't know how to really approach this statement, I feel like a woman. If we just take it at face value, is that I'd like to hear from you what your understanding of a woman is. I'd like to hear what you're thinking are these emotions that you might have that are woman emotions. Or I want to hear from you what physical sensations you're actually feeling in your embodied self that you take to be female. Now, that what a man is actually saying when he says that he feels like a woman is that he thinks he's a woman. And that opens the door to an entirely different, more productive, and more important conversation. Now we can have a conversation about, okay, I get it. You think that you're a woman. Now let's see what we can do with these beliefs that you have with respect to being a female. So when it comes to this question of gender identity or biological reality, how should we treat individuals, and what should we believe as a culture when someone says that they are a man or a woman? And the big question that I think we need to address is, who makes this decision? Who makes the decision of whether or not it's going to be biological reality or it's going to be gender identity that begins to shape not only how individuals think, but how our culture approaches this question at large? Well, I'll share with you what I think, or I think that at least what I believe is a very fruitful place for us to begin in thinking about this. And the answer, I believe, surprisingly enough, is that the starting point is philosophy. Now, that will open the door for us in answering the question of what approach is best for how to regard and treat persons who think that they are something other than their birth sex. I want to expand on this just a little bit, is that I don't believe that medicine and science can help initially in answering this question. Why? Well, when we ask what science says or what medicine says, we have to remember that science doesn't say anything. Scientists do. That medicine doesn't say anything. Medical practitioners do. And we have to consider what philosophy is driving these enterprises. And we need to look under the hood and ask that more fundamental question. Secondly, is that I don't believe that law and politics can help initially. Now, if you think it through a little bit, law and politics are really about power. And however, power that's detached from any principle of philosophical truth is illegitimate. Let me just say that one more time. That power that's detached from any principle of philosophical truth is illegitimate, and it leads to tyranny. Finally, is that I don't think that the answer to this question is found initially in religion. Now, quoting Bible verses to people who don't believe the Bible convinces no one. We must start with reasons that are accessible to all. and have a common conversation about this issue. At the end of the day, that gender ideology has touched every aspect of our lives and every institution within not just our society, but societies across the world. This doctrine deserves careful scrutiny, and that careful scrutiny must never be at the expense of those who have embraced it or who are promoting it. We must love deeply, but think clearly. However, I believe that there is a truth to be discovered, there is a truth to be shared, and there is a truth that sets people free. Hey, thanks for watching. I appreciate you spending some time with me on this particular episode of my journey of ministering to a transsexual Christian, and I hope that you'll join me next time. That's it for now. Bye-bye.